Hello, I am Rebekah Patrick, candidate for South Carolina State House District 98. Today, I wanted to take a moment to discuss an issue that is very important to me and the many victims of domestic abuse throughout this state. In 2013, South Carolina ranked number 1 for the third time in 10 years for domestic violence, specifically men killing women. The rate at which women in South Carolina were being killed by men was more than double the national average. This is completely unacceptable, and this situation is reflective of the culture propagated by state law. This is one category we don't want to be first in, or even near the top. We have been in the top 10 states for the last 15 years. State law, unfortunately, encourages domestic abuse and violence. The law literally trivializes these cases, oftentimes treating animals with more respect than women. For example, South Carolina's maximum penalty for a first-time domestic violence assault is 30 days in prison. The maximum penalty for first-time animal abuse is 5 years. South Carolina has an animal shelter in each of our 46 counties, but we only have 18 shelters for women. A domestic violence offender must be charged 3 times before it is considered a felony. We depend on state law to defend victims of domestic violence. This is non-negotiable. We must stand up for battered women and children. What message is the state legislature sending women when they continue to ignore the situation? When the state has a history of letting domestic abusers off easy, victims are more likely to drop charges in an attempt to appease the abuser. Domestic abuse beats down a victim's self-confidence and self-worth. Victims feel they aren't worth the trouble of anyone helping them. And since the state is so lenient on abusers and unaccommodating to victims, they feel justified in making this conclusion. This also sends a message to perpetrators that it's okay to abuse their partners, both verbally and physically. Increasing penalties for offenders while providing adequate shelters for victims is just the first step to solving our domestic abuse problem. According to the South Carolina Attorney General's website, there is a program in place to prosecute domestic violence and sexual assault cases. This program also trains law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, and victim advocates about the causes, consequences, and laws pertaining to domestic violence and sexual assault. We have a federal grant that helps pay for this program. However, it is evident we need to do a better job of funding this program while providing oversight, ensuring training is up to date. Attorney General Wilson and the Executive Director of the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence have pleaded with our state legislature for stronger laws concerning domestic violence. Despite this, only one bill addressing domestic violence was passed in this year's congressional session. It has nothing to do with the victims themselves, but rather their pets. The bill made basic provisions to ensure victims' animals were looked after. But what about the people? What about the women and children that are affected by this violence on a daily basis? Our legislature has failed these victims. They failed to lead. We need to change the attitude the legislature has toward abuse. It's not the woman's fault. She is not to blame. We as a state need to do a better job offering opportunities for these women to leave their abusive partners safely. We need to do a better job of empowering women and letting them know we care about them. The horrors of domestic abuse go beyond the battering of partners and their children. A domestic abuser is significantly more likely to injure, maim, or murder their victim if they have access to a firearm. According to a recent poll conducted by the Post and Courier, 81% of South Carolinians agree that the state should adopt a law that would make it easier for law enforcement to keep firearms out of the hands of domestic violence offenders. This is a clear majority. The state cannot ignore this. My opponent, Chris Murphy, most likely won't support this common sense measure because he wouldn't want to tarnish his NRA approval rating. Legislators like Murphy have their hands tied by third-party organizations outside of the state. I refuse to sell myself out to these organizations because I don't want politics to influence my ability to serve my district. I am not for sale. If elected, I belong to the people of District 98. I will not be burdened by such trivial matters like my opponent. Unfortunately, Chris Murphy has failed to deliver even when the solutions are served to him on a silver platter. Representative Sellers put up a bill to stiffen penalties for first-time domestic violence offenders, but it never left the House Judiciary Committee, of which Mr. Murphy is a member. Sellers said that some of the members of this committee were more intent on blaming the victims for staying in the abusive relationship. Murphy, sadly, has remained silent on the topic. Is he one of the legislators blaming victims for the crimes of their abusers? We all have women in our lives that we love. Our mothers, daughters, spouses. These are people, not numbers. The state has created a catch-22 for abused women. If they want to leave, the state has a history of abandoning them. If victims stay, the state blames them. We need to elect people into office who are willing to put the citizens before politics. I will give a voice to those silent victims who had theirs stolen by years of abuse and neglect. This is an issue that should have been worked on many years ago. This is going to take time and dedication for both the legislators and those helping the victims. We need to take this issue seriously. South Carolina can do better than this. I'm Rebekah Patrick for State House 98. Please join me in my mission to bring accountability and transparency to the State House. Together we can move mountains and bring abusers to justice. Thank you.